I stared at the ornate mahogany casket, my eyes blurred by a constant stream of tears. The sea of mourners had long since departed, leaving me alone to say my final goodbye to Dad. The suffocating silence was shattered by Derek's voice. "So, how much are we getting from your old man?" I whipped around, eyes wide with disbelief. "What? His estate?" Derek pressed, no trace of sympathy in his tone. "The inheritance? How much will it be?" A lump formed in my throat as the weight of his callous words hit me. This was the man I'd married, the one who'd professed his undying love and support just months ago. Yet here he stood, mere hours after we'd laid Dad to rest, fixated solely on potential financial gain. I don't know the details," I stammered, still reeling from the emotional whiplash. Derek scoffed. "Well, you better find out. Your old man was loaded. We're entitled to our cut." Anger flared within me, a fire ignited by the stark contrast between the man before me and the one I thought I'd married. "My father just died, Derek? Show some respect." His eyes narrowed. "Don't get all sanctimonious on me. This is the real world, babe. Money talks." I opened my mouth to retort, but the words died on my lips. In that moment, it was as if the veil had been lifted, revealing the true nature of the man I'd vowed to spend my life with. The man whose ambition and greed clearly outweighed any love for me. Choking back tears, I stormed out of the room, Derek's voice trailing behind me. "We're not going to struggle like your parents did, Marlene. You hear me? This is our chance." His words echoed through the cavernous halls of the funeral home, a cruel reminder that the life I thought we had was nothing but an illusion. I couldn't shake the feeling of disillusionment as memories from happier times resurfaced, taunting me with the facade Derek had so expertly constructed. Our early years played like an idyllic montage, his hand gently resting on the small of my back as we strolled through the park, his warm smile as we dined by candlelight, his infectious laughter echoing through our modest apartment. In those days, money held little importance for us. Derek was content working as a high school English teacher, believing that impacting young minds was the noblest of callings. I poured my heart into the local nonprofit, inspired by Dad's philanthropic spirit. We lived simply, but our bond was rich with understanding and shared purpose. Perhaps that's what made Derek's descent into greed so insidious. The shift was gradual, like a malignant growth festering unnoticed. At first, the changes were subtle, a newfound fixation on designer labels, an inexplicable disdain for his once beloved profession, trivial indulgences that I naively overlooked, blinded by the idealistic notion that the man I loved remained unchanged at his core. Our first major clash came when Derek abruptly resigned from teaching without discussing it with me first. "This job is beneath me," he scoffed, tossing his school ID onto the kitchen counter. "I'm destined for greater things." I stared at him, bewildered. "But you always said teaching was your calling. What's going on, Derek?" He waved a dismissive hand. "I've outgrown that mindset, babe. It's time to aim higher, starting with finding a career worthy of my talents." In the days that followed, Derek's disdain for frugality became apparent. Date nights transformed into reservations at opulent restaurants where the wine list cost more than my monthly salary. Weekends once spent hiking or visiting museums gave way to conspicuous shopping excursions, our humble abode rapidly filling with designer furnishings and ostentatious art pieces. "You deserve the finer things in life," he'd insist whenever I questioned the extravagance, his words laced with a strange undercurrent of resentment. My pleas for restraint and open dialogue fell on deaf ears. Derek had been consumed by an insatiable hunger, one that steadily drove a wedge between us. The man I'd married, the one who found joy in simplicity and connection, was slipping further away with each materialistic indulgence. Derek's fixation with wealth and status only intensified as the months ticked by. Our once peaceful home became a battleground, with heated arguments erupting over his reckless spending habits. "This Rolex cost more than my entire year's salary," I shouted, waving the ostentatious timepiece in his face. "We can't afford these kinds of luxuries, Derek," he scoffed, snatching the watch back. "Don't be so provincial, Marlene. This is the lifestyle we deserve, the one your rich daddy enjoyed while looking down his nose at the rest of us." The bitterness in his tone struck me like a physical blow. "My father worked hard for everything he built," I shot back, fighting the sting of tears. and he never flaunted his wealth like some arrogant buffoon. Derek's eyes narrowed dangerously. Well, now it's my turn. Our turn. We're not living like paupers anymore. Desperate to make him see reason, I tried a different tack. Don't you remember how happy we were when money wasn't a priority? We had everything we needed, each other, fulfilling work, a warm home. Had being the operative word, he sneered. I'm not settling for your hippie ideals and second-hand dregs anymore. Either get on board or get out of my way. The venom in his words left me reeling. This angry, materialistic stranger had fully consumed the man I once knew and loved. In the days that followed, the disintegration of our marriage accelerated at a dizzying pace. Derek grew more distant, his routine now centered around glad-handing with the city's elite and ingratiating himself with wealthy social circles. If I dared broach the subject of his wasteful spending, he'd brush me off with thinly veiled contempt. Don't worry your pretty little head about finances, dear, he purred in that mocking tone. Just leave it to me. It wasn't until Elena, my closest friend, pulled me aside one afternoon that I began to see the full extent of Derek's betrayal. Marlene, I have to tell you something, she said uneasily, her warm brown eyes filled with pity. Lowering her voice, she continued, I saw Derek having lunch with some woman last week, at that new high-end bistro downtown. My heart plummeted. What? Are you sure? Elena nodded solemnly. Honey, I'm so sorry. From the way they were interacting, it seemed like more than just a business meeting. Bile rose in my throat as her implication washed over me. Of course, in his endless pursuit of wealth and status, Derek's indifference towards me had given way to outright infidelity. The once solid foundation of our marriage had crumbled, reduced to rubble by his greed and wandering eye. Choking back tears, I met Elena's mournful gaze and forced out the words that had been weighing on me for far too long. I think I need to leave him. Despite my newfound resolve to leave Derek, extricating myself from the marriage proved easier said than done. Not only did his deceit and greed continue unabated, but his professional life began spiraling out of control as well. It started with the little things. Arriving home progressively later from work, absently scrolling through his phone during what few conversations we still had. When I finally mustered the courage to confront him, his excuse was always the same. Just trying to get ahead at the firm, babe. You know how it is. Except I didn't know. The Derek I'd married had loved his job teaching high school English, finding genuine fulfillment in fostering young minds. This obsessive, workaholic behavior was yet another glaring red flag that the man I vowed to spend my life with was long gone. The cracks in his professional facade became increasingly apparent over the following weeks. Meetings with supervisors held behind closed doors, urgent hushed phone calls, the vacant stare that often clouded his eyes, all signs that his career was hanging by a thread. One evening I returned home from the nonprofit to find Derek slumped on the couch, disheveled and reeking of stale liquor. You're home early, he slurred, not bothering to lift his head from where it lolled against the armrest. I bristled at his flippant tone. Derek, what's going on? You're worrying me. With a grunt, he hauled himself into a sitting position and fixed me with a bleary glare. What's going on is that I'm about to lose my job because the bigwigs don't appreciate my innovative strategies. He sneered the last words, making air quotes with his fingers. My brow furrowed. This was the first mention of any workplace issues. Why didn't you tell me? We could have discussed it, tried to. Discussing it isn't going to save my career, he snapped, cutting me off. Those elitist pencil pushers have had it out for me from day one. They're just intimidated by my potential. I opened my mouth, but he barreled onwards, working himself into an irate frenzy. Well, screw them. I don't need their pathetic six-figure gig. There are way bigger opportunities on the horizon, opportunities that'll make their bourgeois little heads spin. Unsure how to respond, I could only stare in stunned silence as Derek ranted and raved about corporate conspiracies and his bright future. His words may have been fueled by the hazy indignation of alcohol, but they hinted at the wounded pride and bitter resentment steadily poisoning his psyche. In that moment, it became clear. The stable career and comfortable life we'd built together no longer captivated Derek's ambitions. Our once modest dreams had been supplanted by a ravenous hunger for status, power, and wealth. Lots of wealth. The next afternoon, Elena called with another bombshell that obliterated any remaining illusions about my husband's integrity. "Marlene, you're not going to like this," she began uneasily. "But I saw Derek meeting with some woman again yesterday, at that park near downtown." My grip tightened on the phone as realization settled in like a leaden weight. "Let me guess, not the kind of meeting you'd expect between coworkers?" There was a weighted pause before Elena exhaled slowly. "No, honey, definitely not." All at once, the pieces began clicking into place. Derek's frequent late nights, his newfound obsession with wealth and status, his indifference towards me, it all stemmed from another woman. Another life he was building, one untethered from the marriage vows he'd so carelessly discarded. My next words came out in a choked whisper. "He's been cheating on me, hasn't he?" Elena's pained silence was confirmation enough. In that moment, the floodgates shattered, a torrent of rage and betrayal crashing over me as I realized the true depths of my husband's selfish depravity. Through my sobs, I managed to choke out one final question. Does she have money?" Elena's response cleaved what little remained of my heart in two. "Yeah. From what I overheard, she's loaded." After Elena's revelation, a numb disbelief enveloped me for days. Part of me still clung to the desperate hope that Derek's indiscretions were just a momentary lapse, that the man I loved was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the avarice and betrayal. That flicker of naive optimism was extinguished one frigid evening when the evidence of his unfaithfulness slapped me squarely across the face. I had returned home late from a charity fundraiser, my body and spirit drained from putting on a brave face all night. Padding into the kitchen, I was surprised to find the lights on and Derek's laptop open on the counter. At first, I dismissed it as him simply forgetting to log off before leaving for wherever it was he disappeared to these days. But as I drew closer, something on the screen caught my eye. An unmistakable charge from a high-end jewelry boutique. My heart stuttered as I clicked to scrutinize the charge further. There it was in glaring digital font, a receipt for a diamond tennis bracelet totaling nearly $10,000. Ice flooded my veins as the sick realization dawned on me. This was no treat for his devoted wife. This was an extravagant gift, purchased with funds from our joint savings account, the one meant for our future and security. The one Derek had been steadily draining to bankroll his tawdry affair. White-hot anger lanced through me, mouth going dry as I heard the telltale jingle of keys at the front door. Derek sauntered in a moment later, seeming not to notice me at first. It wasn't until I cleared my throat loudly that his gaze snapped over, eyes widening fractionally. "Oh, hey, babe. Didn't expect you home, so. Who is she?" I cut him off, jaw clenched. He blinked dumbly. "Who's who?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped, snatching up the laptop and shoving the incriminating receipt in his face. "Who's the woman you've been spending our savings on?" Understanding dawned across Derek's features, swiftly morphing into a sneer. "So what if I got somebody a little gift? I've more than earned the right to spend my money how I see fit." My hand reflexively flew to my stinging cheek before I even registered the crack of his backhand. "Don't you dare talk down to me," he snarled, eyes glittering with contempt. "If it weren't for me, you'd still be a washed-up nobody slumming with the paupers." Shock and pain paralyzed me as Derek unleashed the full torrent of his vitriol. "Let's be honest here, Marlene. Our marriage was a mutually beneficial arrangement. Nothing more. I played the doting husband while you dangled the carrot of your old man's fortune in front of me. Well, I'm sick of chasing scraps." He grabbed a fistful of my hair, wrenching my head back so our faces were inches apart. The acrid reek of bourbon and expensive cologne assailed my senses. "It's time you held up your end of the bargain. I want access to that trust fund, all of it. Because let's face facts. I'm the only adult in this relationship, the one with actual ambition and drive. Without me, you'd still be a pathetic little charity case living off Daddy's scraps." His words lacerated my soul, finally obliterating any remnants of the honorable man I thought I'd married. This cruel, domineering monster was the true Derek Hollister. A black-hearted conman who had masterfully played me for a fool using the oldest trick in the book. He released me with a disdainful shove, letting my body crumple limply to the floor as he stalked off, already dialing his phone. "Hey baby, it's me," he purred. "Clear your evening. Daddy's about to come into some money." I kept my head bowed as Derek stormed back into the kitchen, his expensive loafers clicking menacingly on the tile. A tremor ran through me, every instinct screaming at me to flee, but I remained rooted to the spot, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation. "Well," he sneered, grabbing a fistful of my hair and yanking my head back. "I'm waiting for an explanation, you ungrateful little—" "There is no inheritance," I interrupted, the words tumbling out in a breathless rush. "Not for you, at least." Derek's face contorted in an incredulous sneer. "What the hell are you talking about?" Steeling myself, I met his gaze unflinchingly. My father's assets and holdings were all locked into an irrevocable trust after his death. Yeah, in order for either of us to access a single cent, we both have to agree. Comprehension sank in, quickly followed by disbelief. You're lying. I'm not," I stated it simply, matter-of-factly. Those were the conditions he stipulated, a final test to judge the character of the person I chose as a husband. Derek opened his mouth, but I pressed on, determined to unleash the torrent of pent-up emotion that had been simmering all these years. "He knew, Derek. My father saw through your facade from the beginning. He recognized you for the materialistic, self-serving leech that you are." The words spilled forth like shrapnel, each one laced with a lifetime's worth of anger and disgust. "I was just a means to an end for you. A convenient pathway to the fortune you thought was your birthright. Well, let me enlighten you." My voice dropped to a seething hiss. "The only birthright you'll ever receive is a parade of sleepless nights, wondering how you could have been so blind to sacrifice everything for greed." A vein pulsed visibly in Derek's forehead as I issued the killing blow. "This marriage is over. Consider the settlement from my personal savings your reward for playing the part so convincingly. It's more than you deserve, but at least now you won't drag anyone else down with your pathetic existence." The resounding slap echoed through the cavernous kitchen like a gunshot. My head whipped to the side from the force of the blow, the sharp sting blossoming across my cheek as I crumpled to the floor. Derek towered over me, chest heaving with unbridled rage. You ungrateful, treacherous bitch," he roared, specks of spittle flying from his lips. "After all I sacrificed for you? For US?" With a feral snarl, he hauled me up by the collar of my blouse until our faces were mere inches apart. His next words dripped with venom. "You'll be the one wondering, Marlene. Wondering how you'll survive without a single penny to your trust fund name. Because I'll make sure every friend, every business associate knows exactly how low you stooped to try and rip me off." He shoved me away, my back slamming against the counter as I fought to remain upright. "This isn't over, not by a long shot. You hear me?" Chest heaving, eyes wild with fury, Derek snatched up his coat and stormed towards the front door, pausing only to lob one final parting shot. "Have fun with your precious charities, you pathetic do-gooder, because my dear, dear wife, that's all you'll have left when I'm through." The door slammed with deafening finality, leaving me huddled on the kitchen floor, cradling my throbbing face as the enormity of my situation washed over me. Derek's path of destruction was only just beginning, and whether I was prepared or not, I was squarely in the crosshairs. In the days following Derek's explosive departure, I found myself adrift, unmoored by the jarring reality that my life had become unrecognizable. The cozy home we'd built, the dreams we'd shared, all desecrated by one man's insatiable greed. My initial instinct was to withdraw, to lick my wounds and mourn the demise of my naively idealistic notions about love and partnership. But the more I dwelled on Derek's vicious threats, the more a simmering fury took root. He wanted to drag my name through the mud? To punish me for seeing through his charade? Well, two could play at that game. It started small at first. A carefully worded email to our property manager, ensuring Derek had no way to siphon further funds from our joint accounts. Another message to my assistant at the nonprofit, alerting her that I would need to take some personal time. Then came the bigger moves, executed with a calculated precision that would make even Derek's mercenary soul proud. First, I orchestrated a video call with Alina, filling her in on every lurid detail of Derek's betrayal and demanding she back my version of events, should he try any underhanded tactics. Her expression shifted from horror to grim resolution as I outlined my gambit. Next, I drafted the divorce papers, employing the shrewdest family law firm in the city to guarantee Derek received not a penny more than what I deemed fair restitution, a settlement payment of $200,000 from my personal trust, enough to ensure he could slink out of my life forever, but not so exorbitant that he could squander it indefinitely. Elena insisted on being present for the signing, watching with poorly concealed disdain as Derek scrawled his name with a trembling hand. "I hope you realize how lucky you are," she said, voice low and filled with quiet menace. "If it were up to me, you'd be leaving with nothing but the clothes on your back, you spineless gravy-trained." "Elena, it's done," I interjected firmly, as much for her benefit as to halt Derek's wounded sputtering. "He's gotten what he deserves. More than he deserves, even." The implication hung heavy in the air as the two of us stared him down, daring him to protest, to unload the inevitable torrent of vitriol I knew was simmering behind those smoldering eyes. But after an agonizing moment, Derek simply gathered up the papers and stormed towards the exit without a word. Just before disappearing through the door, he paused, turning to fix me with one final glower. "This won't be the last you hear from me, Marlene." It wasn't a threat, but a snarled promise, saturated with a bitterness so viscous it was nearly tangible. Then, like a noxious vapor dissipating in the breeze, he slipped out the door and was gone. It would be weeks before I heard from Derek again, the eerie silence only periodically shattered by news of him liquidating assets or reports of increasingly erratic public outbursts. A small, vindictive part of me relished every lurid detail, savoring his downward spiral into irrelevance. But I knew this temporary reprieve was precisely that, temporary. Sooner or later, Derek's rage and indignation would reach a crescendo, and when it did, I intended to be ready. Because while he'd been content to leech from others for sustenance, I was preparing to fight this battle the same way I'd built my entire life, through hard work, perseverance, and a steadfast refusal to let anyone or anything break me. Not even the man who had once sworn to cherish me, in sickness, health, and utter betrayal of every vow. The first whispers began trickling in a few weeks after Derek's unceremonious exit from my life. Snippets of information delivered by well-meaning friends and colleagues, each one more damning than the last. "Did you hear Derek got fired from his job? Apparently he was skimming funds for personal use. I ran into Derek downtown the other day. He was drunk, ranting about you and your dad's money like a man possessed. Derek's been blacklisted by every law firm in the city after that courtroom outburst. He's become a total pariah." At first, I shrugged off the gossip as idle chatter, gossamer threads of hearsay that held no true weight or substance. But as the reports persisted, it became impossible to ignore the harsh reality. Derek's unraveling was veering rapidly into total meltdown territory. It all came to a head during a garden party hosted by Elena to celebrate the launch of her new art gallery. I had been mingling amiably with potential donors when the first piercing shatters of glass shattered the refined ambiance. A chorus of startled gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as Derek stumbled into view, wild-eyed and swaying perilously. "There she is," he bellowed, words slurred and reeking of cheap liquor. "The ungrateful harpy who destroyed everything." Elena's security team immediately moved to intervene, but he shrugged them off with drunken bravado. "Don't try and silence me," Derek raged, spittle flying from his chapped lips. "Everyone here deserves to know what kind of shrew they're dealing with." My cheeks flushed crimson as every eye turned towards me. Clearing my throat, I addressed the owner of the gallery in measured tones. "Please accept my apologies for this disruption. I'll handle." "She played me for a fool, every single one of you," Derek interrupted, his tirade rapidly crescendoing into unhinged raving. "All for the sake of money. Her money." There were audible gasps and shocked whispers. I fixed Derek with a steely glare. "That's enough, Derek. You've embarrassed yourself enough for one evening." But he barreled onward, fueled by an endless wellspring of spite and injured pride. "After everything I sacrificed for our future, she tried to steal my inheritance. Can you believe the audacity?" The words barely registered before a harsh bark of laughter burst forth, unbidden. I couldn't contain the eruption of bitter mirth bubbling up inside me. "Your inheritance?" I echoed incredulously. Derek, you arrogant, pathetic fool. His jaw went slack, belatedly recognizing the potent mixture of pity and revulsion simmering behind my gaze. Don't you realize why this happened? Why you've ended up a disgraced, destitute laughingstock? My voice dropped to a hush, yet carried clearly across the garden. It's because you put your faith in money rather than the people who actually loved you. You traded ethics and integrity for greed, and now you have nothing. No wealth, no status, not even a shred of self-respect left. My denunciation hung heavy in the air, each word landing like a scathing slap. For one fleeting instant, Derek's bravado faltered. Then, like a rattlesnake rearing back, his expression contorted into one of pure, unhinged loathing. "This isn't over, Marlene," he snarled, fists clenching. "I'll make you regret ever." "Get him out of here," Elena interjected coolly, having materialized at my side with her security detail in tow. Within seconds, Derek was being forcibly hauled away, his drunken imprecations fading into the distance as he was deposited unceremoniously on the sidewalk outside. As tranquility gradually returned to the garden, I felt a gentle pressure on my arm. "Marlene, are you all right?" Elena asked softly, brow creased in concern. I offered her a wan smile and patted her hand reassuringly. "I'm fine. More than fine, really." My gaze drifted towards the path where Derek had been dragged, visualizing his once smug confidence withering beneath the harsh light of public shame and rejection. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom and release. The demise of my treacherous ex-husband was nearly complete, and from the ashes of betrayal, a new, more resilient woman was emerging. The cheery graduation music clashed with the pit in my stomach as I watched Derek chuck down yet another glass of cheap champagne. He grinned ear to ear, slurring drunken congratulations to our grandson Mason. Something was off about his jovial demeanor. As the reception wound down, I offered to take Mason home, silently dreading the drive back to Derek's house. The place still reeked of my daughter-in-law Jenna's perfume, the sickly sweet smell of fakery. Mason passed out in the back seat before we even left the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, I caught Derek sauntering up behind a group of his sleazy poker buddies, their laughter carrying across the windswept lot. "Can you believe that ditz finally did me a favor and took off?" Derek's words knocked the air from my lungs. "Just think of all the insurance money I'll rake in." The guys roared with laughter, pounding Derek's back like he'd just been crowned king. My hands gripped the wheel as flashes of memories assaulted me. Jenna's trembling smile barely concealing her silent tears, the scribbled note tucked in her journal hidden in the attic. "If you're reading this, Derek has finally gone too far." In that moment, my suspicions solidified into a grotesque reality. The monster I'd watched my daughter fall for, blinded by young lust and his empty promises, had somehow won. Jenna was gone, or worse, all for Derek's greed. The engine revved as I tore out of the lot, Mason jolting awake next to me. "Wow, Grandma, what's the rush?" I steadied my shaking voice, speaking the half-truth I'd been rehearsing for weeks. "Nothing, honey. I just really need to get home." That night, after tucking Mason into the guest room, I pulled out the secret box I'd been stashing in the attic ventilator. Jenna's meager collection of belongings, all that remained of my daughter-in-law's shattered life. Her tattered journal landed in my lap with a thud, my fingers tracing the indentation where her last words were scratched in frantic desperation. "If you're reading this, Derek has finally gone too far. Keep this safe, and keep an eye on Mason." The implications choked me. How long had she suspected Derek's malice? What hell had she been enduring while we all blissfully looked the other way? Hot tears streamed down my cheeks. No more. I swiped them away, my jaw clenching in resolve. Derek's monstrous arrogance had handed me all the evidence I needed. It was time to strike. Over the next few weeks, I watched Derek with hawkish scrutiny. His exuberant spending and boisterous laughter raised eyebrows all over town. New Italian suits, a sports car in cherry red, reservations at the ritziest steakhouses. Living it up since the deadweight ditched him, his vile friends would snicker over bourbon and cigars. I clenched my fists until my nails dug crescents into my palms. How dare he satirize Jenna's disappearance so brazenly? My sweet, gentle daughter-in-law who showered loves on Mason and showered me with hugs even after Derek's affair. Her words from our last lunch echoed in my mind. I think he's up to something, Mom. I've found things, but I'm afraid if I pry, he'll lash out. I shuddered, realizing her disappearance may have saved her life. But from what exactly? I needed answers. My first stop was the bank, requesting statements for all of Derek's accounts, a ploy I spun as concerning for his sudden affluent spending. The documents told a story of deception, maxed credit, compounding gambling debts owed to some terrifying names, and a 7-figure life insurance payout scheduled just weeks after Jenna's disappearance. My blood boiled. That smirking, materialistic snake wasn't grieving. He was cashing in on his wife's vanishing act. I longed to confront him but fought off my rage, knowing I'd need an incredible smokescreen to take him down. Next, I turned my sights on Jenna's inner circle, starting with Tara, her closest work friend. He had money troubles, big ones, Tara confided over a hushed brunch, and Jenna suspected he was unfaithful again, though she never confided details with me. She wrung her hands, voice cracking. I'm just so worried I know, I stated firmly, which is why we're going to find her. Tara's eyes burned with promise. Whatever you need. With an ally and a trail of evidence, Phase 1 was complete. As satisfying as lashing out at Derek felt, I knew I'd have to be patient and judicious. The path ahead would require deft precision. One false move and Mason's safety would be jeopardized. My grandson's life hung in the balance, and I'd be damned if I allowed that snake Derek to slither his way out of this. It was time to enlist some professional assistance from a friend who'd spent his life hunting reprobates like Derek. Phase 2 required calling in the big guns, starting with hitting up my old pal Raymond. Raymond's brow furrowed as he pored over the paper trail I'd compiled on Derek. Bank statements, phone records, even a sordid photo from the strip club where he'd been caught cheating months ago. This is one twisted character you're dealing with, he muttered, shoving the stack aside with a disgusted huff. But it's a good start. I bristled at his nonchalance. A start? Ray, that praved con man plotted to kill my Jenna. Raymond's eyes softened as he reached for my hand. I know, Elle, and we'll nail that bastard's hide to the wall. But we've got to be meticulous, build an airtight case piece by damning piece. Grinding my teeth, I gave a reluctant nod. As a retired police captain, Raymond knew how to play this sadistic game. As much as I craved to barge in, fist-swinging, cooler heads had to prevail, especially for Mason's sake. That poor kid had been fed lie after lie by his father, thinking his beloved mother simply took off. The thought of him trapped in Derek's clutches made my skin crawl. Over the next several days, Raymond and I built a coordinate strike, burning the midnight oil over whiskey and case files. He leveraged his old officer contacts to unearth the sordid details, Derek's bookies, his side chicks, and most damning of all, the inflated life insurance premium he'd started paying weeks before Jenna's vanishing. There's our motive, Raymond said, tapping the document. He quite literally took out a policy on her life before attempting to, well... A lump formed in my throat as I considered the depths of Derek's depravity. What's more, as a teacher with modest earnings, Jenna had been blindsided by the massive payout. No wonder Derek was living so large. With every clue, the picture became clearer. He'd been setting the stage to cash in, all while keeping my beloved girl-in-law clueless to his sinister plot. The dizzying realization made me queasy. Just as I steadied my breath, Raymond slid another photo across the table. Derek stumbling from a sleazy motel room, lips smeared in tawdry lipstick, his sly grin stretching ear to ear. This was taken 3 days after Jenna went missing, Raymond said grimly. Care to guess who our friend in the cowboy hat is? I squinted at the petite blonde emerging behind Derek, her face partially obscured but still achingly familiar. Tara, Jenna's friend. The same young woman who had just promised to help us bring her down. The deception left me seething as my fists clenched. I should have known that snake couldn't be trusted. But then it hit me. What if this was merely another strategic deception, one that could play perfectly into our trap? A slow smile spread across my lips. Oh, she's going to help us all right, I purred, snatching up the incriminating photo. More than she'll ever know. Raymond cocked an eyebrow but said nothing, wise enough to let me take the reins. He simply refilled his glass as I outlined my master plan, one that would leverage every last player on the chessboard to protect Mason and bury Derek once and for all. Revenge, like justice, would be best served piping hot. The family dinner was a dry run for my grand inquisition of Derek. Raymond and I had meticulously assembled every document, every photo, an overwhelming case to dismantle his lies once and for all. Yet a bigger challenge loomed: Mason. His allegiance was still divided between his beloved late mother and his manipulative, very much alive father. I had to tread carefully, protecting him from the full, sordid truth, until Derek's defenses were shattered. Mason eyed me cautiously from across the table as I laid out the bread and salad. Derek, ever the arrogant fool, filled his wineglass to the brim, oblivious to the reckoning on the horizon. "You've seemed awfully preoccupied lately, Elaine," he said with a smirk. "Everything okay over there in Vinegar Villa?" I bristled but maintained my poise. "Everything is fine, Derek. I've just been catching up on some reading." His brow arched in mock concern. "Oh, do tell. Maybe I can recommend a nice work of fiction to lift your spirits." The venom in his voice was palpable. This smug bastard had no shame, did he? No matter, I'd wipe that Cheshire grin off his face soon enough. Suppressing a twisted smile, I retrieved the thick manila folder tucked under my seat. "Actually, I've been studying up on much more riveting literature. The kind with pictures." With a flat thump, I slapped the folder on the table, its contents spilling free: crime scene photos, bank statements, Inizined motel stills. Raymond remained stoic, but Derek's complexion drained of color. "The hell is this?" he sputtered. "The truth," I said evenly. I turned to Mason. "Something your father seems allergic to." Mason's eyes darted between Derek and me. Horrified confusion splashed across his face. "Dad, what—" "Don't listen to her, son," Derek spat, sweat beading his brow. "Your grandma's had too much goddamn Pinot and—" "I've had enough," I roared, slamming my fists on the table. "Enough of your lies, your philandering, your vile disrespect for Jenna and this whole family." Wine sloshed from overturned glasses as Derek shot to his feet. "How dare you, you conniving old bat! You've gone and lost your damn mind." Raymond rose like a monolith beside me, his baritone voice cutting through the commotion. "Can it, dirtbag? The Hashers are all here, therapists, clergy, everyone who gave a damn about Jenna. We've got enough to put you away for—" I tuned out the legal jargon, focusing on Mason. Shock and horror contorted his boyish features as the weight of the truth crashed over him in waves. My heart ached to shield him from this pain, this ultimate betrayal. Tears streamed down his face as he turned to Derek. "Dad, what did you do?" Derek's face reddened. For an instant, I pitied the boy still clinging to his father's imaged nobility. Then reality struck in the form of Derek's chilling backhand. "You'll do as I say, you disrespectful little—" I moved on instinct, my elbow catching his ribs with a sickening crack before Raymond hauled him back. The beast's true colors raged to the fore, mercilessly unleashed on his only child. As Mason crumpled to the floor, I rushed to his side, pulling him close. He sobbed into my chest, so fragile, yet still clinging to hope. Hope that for once, truth would finally prevail over lies, and I would ensure it did, no matter how much carnage the gathering storm would leave in its wake. The aftermath of Derek's public meltdown was a blur. Mason refused to speak to or even look at his father, staying glued to my side like a terrified child. I didn't blame him. That ruthless slap had finally shattered the illusion of Derek's hollow paternal facade. As for Derek himself, he ricocheted between blustering threats and sniveling pleas as Raymond's cop buddies hauled him away on suspicion of domestic violence. Of course, it was merely the tip of the iceberg, but an important first step to strip away his freedom and his cockiness. "I want that smug prick to feel the walls closing in from every angle," Raymond assured me later that evening over straight whiskeys. We'd reassembled at his place to regroup, poring over the meticulously assembled case files and devising our multi-pronged attack strategy. With Derek safely tucked away, we could accelerate our efforts without him slithering free. "First order of business is protecting Mason," I said, jaw clenched. "He's not going anywhere near that snake again until the venom's been completely extracted." Raymond nodded grimly. "Agreed. We'll get emergency custody pushed through so he's fully in your care. Judges will side with us, especially after that sick display." "Good." I drained my glass, relishing the slow burn at the back of my throat. "Because the bastard crossed the final line when he struck that boy. Everything from here on out is scorched earth." For the next several hours, we assembled our chess pieces. Anonymous tips firing off to the police about Derek's illicit gambling, shady business dealings, and possible crimes against Jenna. A meticulous forensic audit to freeze every last penny of his assets, smokescreen transactions designed to panic him into revealing his hand. Finally, we formed the centerpiece, a meticulously planned sting operation to catch Derek red-handed in the midst of his next infidelity. This one to be captured on video and splashed across every social media feed in town. I grinned wolfishly as Raymond outlined the tech specs, special lenses and ultra-encrypted streaming links primed to broadcast Derek's lies and lechery to a hand-picked audience of influential friends, employers, anyone who could maximize his public flaming. He'll be so disgraced, so hamstrung by looming charges, that rolling over and confessing everything will be his only chance to try saving face. Raymond purred, clearly relishing the intricacies of our ornate takedown. I simply nodded, adrenaline thrumming through my veins as visions of Derek's unraveling danced before me. He deserved far worse than a fractured reputation or quelched finances. Budding Mason, my poor, innocent grandson, that unforgivable sin warranted the harshest karmic vengeance this life could serve, and I would be its sword of deliverance. Draining the last amber dregs from my glass, I turned to Raymond with a feral gleam. Let's make that bastard bleed. The sting was going off without a hitch. Tara had lured Derek to the seedy downtown motel with practiced precision, her coquettish texts and promises of fun speaking directly to his baser impulses. From my discreet staging point down the hall, I could hear the telltale sounds of Derek's arrival, his arrogant bravado greeting Tara, that familiar slithery tone that made my skin crawl. Well, hello there, gorgeous. You're looking even tastier than those pictures you sent. Tara's flirtatious girlish giggle was practically theatrical. You always were the charmer, Mr. Sullivan. Now why don't you come on inside and let me take care of you? I had to commend her committed performance, especially knowing that less than 48 hours earlier, I'd strong-armed her into cooperating by showing the proof of her previous trysts with Derek. The fear in those big doe eyes told me all I needed to know. As Derek's oily chuckle faded behind the closed door, Raymond emerged from the shadows, holding up a tiny microchip between his fingers. Cameras are hot and transmitting to our secure channel. Time to go live. We slipped on our headsets and tapped into the feed just as Derek was peeling off Tara's satiny robe, his meaty paws groping her lithe frame with shameless entitlement. God, I've missed this body. The lewd image was merely prelude for the fireworks to come. I thought of Mason, still recovering from his own traumatic disillusionment, and my righteous resolve strengthened. Expose this charlatan for the abusive, self-serving creep he was. That was the only path to justice. On Raymond's mark, our crew activated a precise digital operation, one that broadcasted the live stream to very specific trusted contacts, church leaders, Derek's employers, charity figureheads, upstanding people mortified to see one of their own engaged in such debased improprieties. Pandemonium erupted as our network expanded exponentially across the small town, the shock and horror reverberating through the entire community. The calls and messages deluged my phone in a barrage of disgust and repudiation, and through it all, Derek remained oblivious to his unraveling, rutting away on that tawdry motel room bed, at least until Raymond's gruff voice broke through the speakers. Having fun there, dirtbag. Derek froze, his bulging face snapping up in wild-eyed panic. What is this? A reckoning, Raymond replied coolly. One that's coming at you from all sides, thanks to that cute little video feed you're starring in. At that moment, Derek's phone began ringing off the hook, every busybody and professional contact bearing witness to his brazen indiscretions. His frantic howls and fumbled attempts to kill the stream were utterly fruitless. The depraved spectacle was live for the world to see. Somewhere in that pathetic display of panic and shame, I was dimly aware of Tara gathering her clothes and darting from the room. Her part in our charade was over. Mine, however, was just beginning. Time for the snake's final constriction. Straightening my spine, I strode down the hallway with purpose. The door opened before I could even knock. There stood Derek, his sweaty, horrified face almost subhuman at this point. I locked eyes with the wretched creature, letting the waves of reviled anger wash over me. "Hello, Derek." I said coldly. We need to talk. Derek's world was crumbling. I could see it in his wild, desperate eyes as he stared back at me in the dingy motel room, utterly shell-shocked. This has to be some kind of mistake, he stammered, struggling to cover his nakedness. You can't seriously think I'd... Save it, I snapped, his pathetic excuses like sandpaper against my resolve. The jig is up, Derek. We have everything. The affairs, the gambling, the insurance scam you tried to run on Jenna. It's all been exposed. He recoiled as if struck, his bravado finally deflating under the weight of his sins laid bare. Raymond emerged from the hallway, arms crossed like a sentry guarding an inmate. 2 uniformed officers flanked him, eyes scanning Derek with undisguised repulsion. We've got enough to put you away for a long time, Sullivan, Raymond growled. But even prison will be a cakewalk compared to the beatdown your reputation's about to take. As if on cue, Derek's phone erupted again, a cacophony of shrill rings and pinging text notifications. The shock, the scorn of his community discovering his web of depravity in such dramatic fashion. I watched as he picked it up with a shaking hand, scrolling through the onslaught of vitriol numbly. This can't be real, he whispered, complexion blanching. I'm ruined. Not yet you aren't, I said with chilling finality. But you can start making amends right now by telling us the truth about Jenna. Derek's roomy gaze flicked up to bore into mine, twin vortices of panic and hatred swirling in their depths. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of the darkness that must have consumed my sweet Jenna's final days, the insidious dread she felt around this man she'd once loved. My stomach turned, but I held my steely glare. What did you do? For a span of harrowing seconds, Derek was utterly mute, the whirlwind of his sins rendering him catatonic. Just when I began to lose hope, his thin lips parted once more. I just wanted out, he croaked, voice barely audible. The debts, the money problems. I thought if I could just make her disappear, that big insurance payout would solve it all. The words hung heavy in the fetid air, a damning admission of his greed and monstrosity. Raymond tensed beside me, but I raised a hand to stay him. I needed to hear the unvarnished truth. But Jenna, she must have suspected something, Derek continued, his voice dropping to a guttural rasp. I started clearing out the accounts, keeping her in the dark, anything to keep the payout intact after I took care of her. But she caught wind and bailed. Took off with nothing but a damn ringful of cash from her jewelry box. My heart clenched as hatred bubbled through me like acidic bile. This whole sordid nightmare, every agonizing uncertainty Jenna must have endured in those final weeks, all because her husband craved an easier life. I wanted to unleash a scream, a torrent of sadistic punches, anything to absolve this rage. But I stayed my hand, letting the icy silence eviscerate Derek's soul. Because in this moment, I realized my revenge was complete. He was already in hell, forged of the very lies and betrayal he'd callously inflicted on everyone around him. The stain of his sins would never wash off. So as the police closed in, wrenching his arms behind his back, I simply watched in hollow triumph. No satisfaction, no feeling of release. The monster's secret was out, his freedom forfeit. But at what cost had this justice come? The question haunted me, as Derek was hauled away in disgrace. At last, the search for Jenna could begin in earnest. I only prayed that this nightmare's ending would allow for a shred of healing to take root. The call came just after midnight, Raymond's gruff voice crackling through the line with a mixture of elation and sheer disbelief. We found her, Elaine. Jenna's alive. My legs buckled as the words washed over me, equal parts rapture and terror paralyzing my every nerve. After weeks of feverish searching, haunted by visions of her scared face from that hidden attic journal, she was out there somewhere, safe. Raymond relayed the details. An anonymous tip from a diner waitress in Santa Fe who recognized Jenna's photo from the news broadcasts. Apparently she'd been serving there under an assumed name, laying low as a refugee from her own life. Relief and rage churned through me in sickening waves. While Derek rotted in jail awaiting trial, my poor girl had spent months as a fractured ghost, severed from her loved ones by the man who vowed to honor and protect her. But she was safe. That mantra alone propelled my shaking feet into action, every maternal instinct roaring to reunite with my unsung warrior. The airport's fluorescent lights stung my weary eyes, but I blinked past their glare, scanning every haggard face passing through customs. At last a familiar figure emerged, chocolate ringlets framing her hollow cheeks, her slender frame seeming to hunch under an immense invisible weight. "Mom?" she whispered, tentative and childlike. That was all it took to release the torrent. With a strangled cry, I gathered Jenna into my arms, clinging to her fragile bird bones as the dam burst. We sank to our knees in a tangle of sobs, fear and regret, and blessed relief whirling around us in a maelstrom. "You're safe," I gasped between heaving breaths. "Oh God, you're safe." For long moments we were lost in our raw reunion, willfully blind to the churning current of life swirling around us. When at last Jenna leaned back, her eyes were glassy yet shining with a rekindled spark. "How?" she stammered, the word more rugged gasp than true question. I stroked her matted curls, grimacing at how frail and hounded she looked. No mother should ever have to see their child in such pain. "It's over," I said firmly, steadying my voice. "Derek confessed everything. With help from Raymond and some other supporters, he was exposed and arrested for what he did. All the debts, affairs, everything. It's finished." A tremulous sigh escaped her, somewhere between anguish and blissful release. "So he'll never hurt me again?" "Never," I said, pulling her close, "and I'll make damn sure that snake never gets within a mile of my family ever again." Jenna stiffened at that, pulling back with a panicked look. "Oh, God, Mason! Is he—" "Hey now, it's all right." I raised a soothing hand, unwinding the knot of fear in her gut. "Mason's safe and sound, sweetie. He's with me for now, tucked away from all the ugliness. As soon as you're ready, we'll be a family again." Her hand trembled as it found mine, squeezing with the first embers of a familiar strength flickering back to life in those lost hazel eyes. "I don't know how I'll ever thank you for not giving up on me." I gave her a reassuring look as my own tears flowed freely. "Sometimes revenge is what gets you through the night, baby girl. But for a mother's love—" I pressed my forehead to hers, savoring our reunion as a brilliant new dawn broke on the horizon. That burning light will always lead me home.